Bema, or what the West calls the sanctuary, as the place that symbolically points to the fullness of the kingdom. The holy table, what you refer to as the altar. We would refer to the whole of the area as the altar. We see this as the throne of God and the place of the mystical sacrifice of Christ's saving passion, his death, his resurrection, his ascension, and his second coming. I'm quoting directly from the Anaphoras of Basil the Great and St. John Chrysostom. We remember what is not as yet being part of our own lives, that is the second coming, but we remember it through anamnesis in the Anaphoras, or what the West refers to as the Eucharistic prayers. Only the celebrant stands before the holy table. Concelebrating clergy, which is ancient custom to concelebrate, they stand in a line this way and on the other side. So the first concelebrant is on this side, the second concelebrant on the other side. The deacons stand where Father Deacon Moore is basically in that position, just a little bit behind the main celebrant. The only time you should see celebrants across a row like that, a row of them, is if they are all hierarchs, if they're all bishops. On the holy table, there is always the antimension, which is underneath the gospel book, and the antimension is an icon of the depiction of the taking down of Christ from the cross and laying him in a tomb, and there are relics sewn into it, and it is anointed with chrism, as we are anointed in baptism, and it is anointed by the bishop on Holy Thursday or at the time of the consecration of the church, and we must have an antimencia to celebrate the divine liturgy. I think the only exception would be if you're in a prison somewhere and you just can't obtain it. Patriarch Joseph, they have to celebrate liturgy on his chest in Siberia, because at night when no one is watching, only a few people around. The gospel book is always seated on the holy table. It is only taken off when there is a procession with it or during the readings. It is put upright just before the bread and wine are placed at the great entrance, so that you have to have some place to put the chalice and the discus. We always cross ourselves and we go from one side of the sanctuary to the other. Now, in this part, the synchronon, it's a miniature synchronon. There's always in the center a cathedra for the bishop. Only the bishop sits on the cathedra, of course. The presbyters sit on the bench on either side of the bishop. And if you're a deacon, you never sit down. We will make this dome have an icon of Pentecost, of the descent of the Holy Spirit. Because everything that happens in the church happens through the Holy Spirit. It's the Holy Spirit who comes upon the bread and wine and makes them into the body and blood of Christ. And then in the drum, there will be a depiction of the transfer of the gifts, the great entrance procession. It goes by both names, and it will have angelic beings dressed in the vestments of deacons, carrying the chalice, the discus with the bread on it. This is before it is consecrated, okay? What in the West would be the offertory procession. And they will carry rapidia. These, as a way that icons are used, rapidia are fans. If you look on our website, you can see how it's being used actually during the Divine Liturgy. The deacons wave it over the gifts during the anaphora or the Eucharistic prayer. They're used also over the gospel book and in processions. And the various instruments, such as the spoon and the lance, will be carried by these angelic beings who are dressed as deacons. Then on the walls on either side, that side and this side, will be depicted Old Testament types of the Eucharist, such as the manna in the desert, the prophet Elias being fed by the raven in the cave, the Old Testament appearance to Abraham and Sarah. These will be depicted, the sacrifice of Abel and the sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham, all prefiguring the Eucharist. This wall, because of the trusses, you can't do it normally to go there. And so what we'll do is paint vines. Christ, who is the vine, and we who are the branches. So again, what you're seeing in this programming here is a theme that is essentially Eucharistic, because it is the Eucharist that brings us into the fullness of God's kingdom. This is a seven-branch candlestick is always to be found, usually behind the holy table, and reminding us of the seven gifts of the Holy Spirit. These other lights that you see here are simply for lighting purposes, that's all. At this lower level, we will continue, the local level, we will continue what is already here. What is being depicted are, besides the angels, are our bishops, hierarchs of the church. They are all engaged in the act of the Eucharist, okay? And so that will continue around here with more hierarchs and with deacons on the walls. There will be an icon of the life-giving spring of the Mother of God in that position. And on the other side, where this table on the other side is where about 15 minutes before liturgy begins, the priest and a deacon prepare the bread and wine, and there are many prayers that are said, basically showing that it is the sacrifice that has been prefigured through the Old Testament is completed by Christ. We refer to the bread as the lamb already, even before it is consecrated. And that's before the beginning of the liturgy takes place. And there will be an image behind that, an icon behind that, of Christ as a child, as an infant, on the paten, as a baby on the paten, being slain, actually. You can see the Eucharistic significance of that work. So, has anybody thought for a moment why the Mother of God is there? Because what you often find in these places would be Christ giving communion to the apostles. That's what we be up in that area there.
Is it because Our Lady at the Annunciation made the first communion?
I suppose you could
She
look
was
at
the
that
first
way.
one to communicate.
You could look at that way. In her reception of Christ, yes. That she receives the word into herself. And here, you see, we have Christ as an infant, God making himself small, that the human person is large in the icon, and yet it's an enigma, this icon. And you often find enigmas in iconography because you find enigmas and paradoxes all the time in our faith. She is depicted as a ruler. So the attributes of the scepter and the globe that she has in her hands depicts her as the ruler. Because if you think about this in terms of the Magnificat, her hymn, it is the lowly that are raised up.